What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be working with some Android and some AWS. Oh yes. So I'm going to show you how to work with AWS Amplify in order to create, read, update, and delete the CRUD operations and do all that using DynamoDB. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. And as you can see, we already have a project going. Mine is in Jetpack Compose, but you don't have to worry about that. All this stuff is going to work on whatever type of project you got. So as you can see, we have the different functions that we're going to be creating: read all, read by ID, update, and delete. So your CRUD operations. First thing that we need to do is we need to open up our browser. And then we're going to head over to sandbox.amplifyapp.com. It's going to load up. We're going to choose get started. We'll choose data. We're going to be working with data, obviously. Blank schema, create new schema. Now we're going to create a new model, and who doesn't like a hot model? Ooh, we all love to look at hot models, don't we? Yes, we do. All right, so our hot model has a name, and we want to make sure that the name is required. You can't create a hot model, can't just not have a name, you know, you got to call them something. So now that we have our hot model all set up, call it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. We're going to go to test locally. Now we're going to switch this over to Android. I'm using Kotlin. You go ahead and select Java if you'd like. And we're going to do next. Now, if you don't have the Amplify CLI installed on your computer, you're going to want to copy this line, throw that into the terminal and run it. But I do have Amplify CLI, so I just need to copy this line only. So we're going to grab this line and we're going to go over to our terminal. Let's open that bad boy up. We're going to go over to our terminal. We're going to paste that in there. We're going to hit enter, and we're going to actually pull down essentially the schema that we just created. It's going to set everything up for us, and we'll actually notice that some files are actually created for us in our project. So if we just go over to, Java, and then we do the drop down on the .com, and we take a look at the generated models, you'll see that we have our hot model right here, and we have this Amplify model provider. So let's keep going through these steps, and we're going to go over to here. We're going to copy this. All we really need is the core library desugaring enabled. Let's go ahead and open up our Gradle file. We're going to scroll down to the compile options, paste that right on in there. Then next, what do we need? We need to add in the actual dependencies right here. So I'm going to make sure that I have those copied, and we're going to go down to our dependencies and we'll paste these in down here. Let's double check. Looks like we're done. And now we can just simply sync. All right. And once that's all synced, it's going to show us how we're going to actually go through and create our hot model. So let's go ahead and copy this bad boy right here, and we'll head back over to our main activity like so. And right here we have our create function. Now, before we do any of this, we actually need to configure Amplify. So I'm going to create a new function that will handle that for us. All right, so we have our function called configure amplify, and we're going to call that up in our onCreate method right after the onCreate, the super.onCreate is called. So we'll just configure amplify. We need to make sure that we do this before we do any operations with amplify. And I actually missed a step. It's back over here in step 4. We need to copy this right here. So we need these lines of code in our app, and we're just going to paste that right into our configure method. So as you can see, we're adding in the plugin that's called AWS DataStore plugin. This is going to allow us to use the DataStore category, which is essentially a local database which can be synced back and forth between devices, and we're going to be using DynamoDB in order to do that syncing for us and store that data for us. But we need to make sure that this line is uncommented. Now, this line is only going to work if we actually have our app deployed. So in order for this line to work, we need to actually continue through and our documentation, and we're going to go up to deploy. We'll go ahead and sign up or log in. You will need an AWS account in order to do this. And then it's going to be asking you to enter in an app name. I'll just go ahead and give mine a quick name. All right, so I'll call mine Android Amplify DataStore CRUD, choose your region, and then confirm your deployment. After about 5 minutes of this being set up, we're gonna have an Amplify app created for us, and it's going to actually port the schema that we just created, our hot model, into our Amplify project. All right, and now that we're all done, we're gonna open up the admin UI, and we're gonna go over to data. And as you can see, we got our hot model just waiting for us. Oh yeah. So now what we want to do is we want to pull down our actual app that's connected to our AWS account. So let's go ahead and pull this in our terminal. So I'll go ahead and clear the logs and we'll paste that in there and press enter. And then what it's going to do is it's going to ask permission to make sure that we can authenticate with our Amplify app. We'll go ahead and close that window and go back, and we should see that our terminal is asking us a couple of different questions. So right here, we can see choose your default editor. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to be modifying this, but I'll just go ahead and select Visual Studio Code. We want to make sure that this does say Android, and then it's going to choose the default directory to put our resources in, which that's perfectly fine. The res folder is perfectly fine. And do we plan on modifying the backend? No, but hit yes or hit enter for yes. So now that we have successfully set up our backend, we're pretty much all done with the terminal. We can say bye-bye terminal and close that out. And now we can actually start working on the CRUD functions. So if we head back over and we select data and we select the hot model, we should be able to see how to create our different objects. It'll give us our code snippets right here. So we could just click on it and it should copy it for us, and then we can go over to our function, paste it in, and we can see that our hot model is being created for us. So very nice and simple, just like that. So let's talk a little bit about how we're doing this. So we have an item which is of type hot model, and we're going to use a builder. So the builder is going to actually create the ID for the object that we're about to create, and then we're going to give it a name. Now, lorem ipsum doesn't sound sexy at all. It doesn't sound like a hot model to me. So let's give it a better name. Now that is a hot model. Ooh, yes, I love it. So then we need to fill in all the required properties. Now remember that back over here in our schema for our hot model, we did specify that the name does need to be, it is required. So we needed to pass that in. Now, if we had any like optional properties, then we could add them in, but we wouldn't necessarily have to. But in order to create this model, in order to create this item, then we do need to make sure that we include each of the different properties that are required, and then we follow that up with a .build. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pass this into amplify.datastore.save. That's obviously going to save this object, right? And then we're going to get two different logs. So either we're going to be able to successfully save this item, or we're going to get an error and we're going to be like, nah, sorry, buddy, didn't work. So with all that set up, let's go ahead and run the app, and let's see if we can get our logs to show that we were able to successfully create an item. All right, and there we go. We have our app all open. Let's go ahead and open logcat so we can see what this cat has got to say. And let's clear these logs, and we'll switch back over to our emulator. We'll hit create, and we're gonna see that a lot of things happened, but what we can see is that we were able to save our item. Now let's go ahead and filter this out. All right, so now that we have it filtered, we can see that we do have our item, which is sexy coder XOXO, saved to the database. Now what we want to do is we want to read all the different items. So very simple. All we have to do is we can jump back over to the documentation, and we can go over here. We can figure out how to do a query, right? Very simple. So copy that, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and paste that in there. So very simple, Amplify DataStore. Each of these operations, each of our CRUD operations are going to be prefixed with amplify.datastore, and then whatever you're trying to do. So in this case, we're going to do a query, and we're going to pass in the class of the model that we're trying to query for, right? So we only have one type of model, and that's going to be our hot model. And then it's going to give us an array back. So it's either going to be an empty array, or it's just going to be an array of all the different objects that are saved. But regardless, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially iterate through that array. And then for each of those items, we're going to print out the ID of that item. So let's also include the item name. So item.name as well. So now that we have our logs all set up, let's go ahead and run that again, and we'll do read all. All right, let's clear those logs so we can see it nice and clean like, and we'll hit read all. And now we're going to get our queried item, right? And it's going to give us the UUID of our object, and then it's also going to give us the name of the object as well. So just because I added it in right there, I didn't add a space, my bad. So as you can see, that's going to be our ID. Very simple, straightforward. Now what we want to do is we want to do a query by ID. And in order to show you that, I'm just going to go ahead and copy the ID that I have right here. We're going to paste it in right there so that we have reference to it. And now we're going to do exactly the same thing right here. So as you can see, we're going to do the exact same thing as we did for the read all function. Just copied and pasted it, right? Except we're going to add an additional parameter where we're going to pass in a query predicate. So we can do that by saying where, and then we want to query by the ID. So we'll say where ID. We need to pass in a string right here. So we're just going to pass in the object ID, which I saved up above from this copy, right? So now what we can do, and we just need to end that with a comma. So now we're going to get an array back where all the IDs are equal to this ID. Now, obviously, there's only going to be one object that has an ID with this ID, right? Whether you make multiple objects or not, the ID is supposed to be unique. So this is only going to return one back, right? But it's always going to be an array of one. So what we're going to do is we're not going to do a while statement. What we can do is if has next, then what we can do is we could just say val item is equal to the next item, and then we'll just simply print out queried item by ID, and we'll just only print out the ID this time. So very similar as before, not a whole lot's changed, but I just wanted to show you how it's done. So let's go ahead and run that app. Let's see what we get back, make sure that everything is working, and we're also going to clear these logs. We'll open up our emulator, and we can do read by ID, and we have this queried item by ID, and then obviously it's the same ID as before. So no surprises here, right? Okay, on to the next. Now, an update is pretty much the same exact thing as a create, right? The only problem here is that in order to update, you need the item that you're working with, right? So when you do a save, which is the same thing for creating and updating, it's the same operation or the same method, you still need the whole object in order to save or update that object. Now in this function, the update, we don't have that object, right? And we can't just simply pass in an ID. So what we're going to do instead is for this read by ID method, let's go ahead and return our outcome, which is this item right here, essentially the first hot model that comes back. And then we're going to use that as the object that we're going to be updating. So let's go ahead and turn this into a returning function. So now we have this function being a returning function. However, notice that we are getting our item, our object, our hot model back in a closure. So in order for us to fix that, we're going to be using coroutines so that we can actually pull this up, so that we can actually pull the hot model or item out of this function. We're going to essentially be wrapping this closure with a coroutine. So in order to do that, we'll just say suspend coroutine like so, and then we'll say cont in, and we're going to simply return our hot model. So this allows us to return our hot model in this suspended coroutine. And in order to use a suspend coroutine, we need to also make sure that we mark our function with the keyword suspend as well. So now what we can do is we can get our object, our hot model. And here we have our read by ID wrapped in a coroutine. And once again, if we're going to be doing all that, we need to make sure that this is also a suspend function. So now we have our hot model coming back to us from our read by ID, and then all we need to do is update our hot model. And as you can see, we have our object, our hot model, getting a copy of that builder, and then we just simply update all of the properties that we want to update. In this case, we're just going to use name. Now I'm going to pass in the original name of our hot model, but I'm going to add this updated to it. So it's just going to be appending the string to the end of our hot model. And then since this updated hot model will have the very same ID as our original hot model, when we run save, it's actually going to be updating that object. And there you have it. So once again, amplify.datastore.save, updated hot model, and now we're just simply going to print out updated item 2 and then our new updated object name. So let's run that. Let's give it a peek, clear those logs. Oh, and we have to make sure that anywhere that we were doing suspend, that we do wrap this in a coroutine launch scope. So if we don't do that, we're gonna be running into some bad times. All right, so we wrapped the read by ID in this coroutine io.launch block. We need to do the same thing with update since both of these are suspended functions. So we'll just go ahead and wrap this one as well. And we're looking all good. Let's try to format it. All right, all formatted, and we have this in our update, and let's go ahead and run that again. Hopefully everything goes as expected, right? All right, so we have our app all loaded up. Let's make sure that we can still do the read by ID because it did change. And as you can see, we were still able to see this log queried item by ID. And we're gonna do that again, but we're going to do an update this time. So remember, the update is going to be doing our read by ID first. That's gonna get us our hot model back. And then it's going to try to update that model. So we're doing that with the copy of the builder and then updating those objects and saving them. So let's go ahead and try that out with an update. We get the queried item by ID. We see that we have our ID listed right there. And now our sexy coder, hug kiss, has been updated. Ooh, not such a sexy name anymore, but hey, it is what it is. And lastly, we're gonna do delete. Now, delete is a little bit different. It really only requires the ID in order to delete that object, but you still have to create a copy of that object in order to pass it into the delete function. But you can do this if you use a special method called justID. So as you can see, we call justID, which is a static method, and we pass in our object ID, which is provided above. And then just like everything else with Amplify, we're gonna do amplify.datastore, and then we'll just say we're gonna delete this item. So we'll just pass in our hot model. Simple as that. Now, all the different methods that you wanna watch for, like the success and failure, same as before. All right, so as simple as that, we're gonna once again run this, and let's pull up our emulator once it's all loaded and clear our logs. And there we go. Now we're gonna hit delete. Now remember that we're not doing anything special here. We're just going to simply create an object that's going to have the ID, and everything else is just gonna be magically deleted with it. We delete it, deleted object with this ID. So now if we do a read all, we should be able to see that we are not getting back our object. All right, and then if we take a look at it, oh well, there's no next item, so it's obviously not going to print anything. But essentially, it's showing that there is nothing left in that list to show, so nothing's being printed, and that's just pretty much showing that, hey, we did successfully delete it. And that's pretty much it. So I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you learned something new. Those were our CRUD operations using Amplify DataStore. And if you have any other videos that you want me to cover, whether it be in Android or if you're looking for a different platform like iOS or Flutter, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Keep in mind that I do have a link to this repo so that you can actually pull the code and you can check it out for yourself, and you can, play around with it all you want. So just keep in mind that you are going to need your own AWS account in order to do some of this stuff, but that's fine too. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you for your time. Go out there, keep coding passionately.